She thought she was just getting rid of an old house. But in the basement, she found something that would change her life forever. The metallic sound echoed through the silent room, as if the place itself had held its breath for decades. A dull, dry rumble followed by a faint, tinkling sound. The dim light from a bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered, revealing dust particles dancing in the air like tiny memories that refused to go away. The smell was of damp wood, of rust, and of history. Marina paused for a moment. His heart was beating faster than he cared to admit. She wasn't the type to be easily impressed, or so she told herself. But there was something there, in the dim basement, that made her feel like she was about to open a door to a place she might never return from. It was the last day before the keys were handed over. The house, once filled with voices, laughter, and arguments, was now empty and cold. The walls seemed to hold ancient echoes, and each room she walked through brought back flashes of a past she'd rather forget. Since her father died, everything had changed. Her relationship with her mother had worn out like old fabric, full of tears that no one bothered to mend. And if Marina were honest, selling that house was more than a transaction. It was an act of liberation. Or at least, that's what she believed. But that day, guided by an inexplicable impulse, she decided to visit the basement, a place she hadn't set foot in since childhood. She remembered that, when she was little, her mother would say that there were only old, worthless things there. But the way she said it, always with a long pause, as if choosing each word, left a shadow of doubt in the air. The narrow staircase creaked under his weight. With each step, the air became denser, colder. The silence was so absolute that Marina could hear her own blood pounding in her ears. That's when he saw it. In the far corner, hidden behind a heavy cobwebbed cabinet, was a small metal door too low to be noticed at first glance. The paint was peeling, and a thick layer of rust tried to seal it forever, but a crack, almost imperceptible, let out a breath of different air, as if the space had its own breath. She approached slowly, feeling a shiver run up her spine. As he pushed the cabinet with effort, a shower of dust fell onto his shoulders. The metal door was revealed in its entirety, and in the center of it a heavy, ancient padlock, as if it held not just objects, secrets. But Marina hesitated. He thought about going back, ignoring it, and continuing with his plans. But there was something, a strange feeling, as if the entire house was watching her, waiting to see if she would dare go further. With trembling hands, she tried to force the lock without success. It was then that he noticed a dry, metallic knock coming from inside, or perhaps it had been his imagination. The slow bass music playing in his head seemed to keep pace with his racing heart. Determined, she went upstairs, called a locksmith, and asked him to come immediately. The man, accustomed to opening safes and locked doors, asked no questions. When he returned to the basement, the smell of rust seemed more intense, almost suffocating. The locksmith, with firm movements, turned his tools until a click echoed through the space. The padlock fell to the floor, breaking the silence like thunder. The door opened with a long, harsh creak, revealing a heavy gray safe, its surface marred by deep scratches, as if someone had, at some point, tried to force it open and given up. Marina knelt before him. His hands, now damp with sweat, ran over the cold surface of the metal. A number was engraved in the corner, almost erased by time. The locksmith, without ceremony, began working on the internal gears. Each mechanical click was like the sound of approaching footsteps. And then it happened. The last click sounded louder than the previous ones. The vault slowly releasing a breath of stale air, laden with memories no one should ever have breathed. Marina held her breath and looked inside. What he saw there wasn't just unexpected. It was something capable of rewriting the entire history of his family. Old letters, sealed envelopes, photographs that didn't seem to belong to the past she knew, and a leather-bound diary marked by time, but still intact. As her hands touched those papers, she realized she had crossed an invisible boundary. Moment on, from nothing would be the same again. Marina was 32 years old. After his father's death, his relationship with his mother was never the same. It wasn't a sudden breakup, the kind that comes with screams and slamming doors. It was a slow, almost imperceptible separation, like a house slowly starting to show cracks in the walls. One day you realize you no longer feel like being there. The warmth of breakfast conversations had faded. Hugs became rare, almost mechanical. Once been strong, now felt like a fragile thread, ready to break with the slightest tug. The house where Marina grew up, for many, would be a temple of happy memories, but for her, it was old walls stained with bitter memories. The narrow hallway brought to mind muffled arguments coming from his parents' bedroom. The kitchen, which had once been the scene of laughter and delicious smells, now only evoked the sound of silence and the clinking of solitary cutlery. It was as if every corner had recorded not only good moments, but also wounds she didn't want to revisit. In recent months, debts have started to pile up. The messages on my cell phone were constant demands, deadlines, cold warnings from institutions that didn't want to hear stories, just numbers. Marina felt the weight intensify with each notification, until one day he made a decision that would change everything, selling the house. He didn't consult his mother. There was no conversation, no request for opinion, no attempt at consensus. Deep down, she knew that this would not be well received, but the urgency of the circumstances, combined with the desire to finally cut the cord that connected her to that place, spoke louder. It was just a property, she told herself. A bunch of bricks, wood, and tiles. It wasn't worth getting attached to. For her, selling was not just a financial solution. It was almost a symbolic act, closing a cycle, turning the page, leaving behind a part of his history that felt more a burden than a legacy. That late afternoon, Marina stopped in front of the house. The sun cast long shadows across the facade, highlighting the peeling paint and dusty windows. She stared at the door as if staring at an old enemy before saying goodbye. In his pocket, his cell phone vibrated with another charge. On the screen, red letters, urgent payment. She sighed, looking away at the rusty gate. But there was something about that vision that, try as she might, she couldn't ignore. If the house was looking back, as if silently saying, "You can try to leave, but you haven't finished what you started here." Marina pushed the thought away, shook her head, and forced a half-smile of relief. In a few weeks, all of that would no longer be her problem. I wouldn't have to walk down that street anymore. I wouldn't have to deal with memories I'd rather keep buried. What she didn't know is that some memories just can't be buried. They wait, patience, and sometimes they hide in the most unlikely places, waiting for the right moment to return. It was the last day before the keys were handed over. And it was on that day that Marina, driven by an inexplicable impulse, decided to go down to the basement, a place she hadn't visited since childhood. What she would find there would not only change the way she saw her mother, but would also rewrite her entire story. On the last day before handing over the keys, Marina was determined to do just one last inspection. He walked through the empty room, along the walls where the paint was peeling in irregular patterns, as if time had left scars. Everything was silent except for the sound of his own footsteps echoing across the ancient floor. That's when he looked at the basement door. She stood there for a few seconds, her hand on the door knob, feeling a slight shiver run down the back of her neck. She had no intention of going down there. After all, she'd avoided that space since she was a child. It had always been a damp, dark, and uncomfortable place. But for some reason, that day, something inside her insisted Colon go. He descended slowly, each step creaking, as if protesting his presence. The air below was cold, heavy, filled with the smell of dust and rust. The light bulb hanging in the center of the ceiling swayed, casting shadows that moved across the walls. In the far corner, partially hidden by an old wooden cabinet, something caught his eye. A small, low, rusty metal door. Curious, she never remembered seeing hard, kicking up a thick cloud of dust that made her cough. The door was covered in rust marks and had a large, heavy padlock, as if someone wanted to ensure that nothing and no one had access to what was there. Marina crouched down and ran her hand over the cool surface, feeling the jagged edges and the metallic smell that clung to the air. His heart raced. Why hide something here? What could be so important that it would be locked away like this? For decades, he pulled the lock a few times, but it was firm. He tried turning, pushing, hitting, but nothing worked. It was at that moment that he thought, what if I open it? The idea sounded dangerous, but irresistible. He quickly went upstairs and, without thinking twice, called a locksmith. When he arrived, he didn't ask many questions. He just went down to the basement with his tools, as if he were used to handling other people's secrets. Marina watched every movement nervously. This silence was only broken by the dry cracks of metal being manipulated. With a final click, the padlock fell to the floor, clanging loudly in the empty basement. The metal door slowly opened, revealing a small compartment inside. Inside it was a sturdy gray safe, covered in a thick layer of dust and old scratches, as if someone had tried to force it open before, without success. "Do you know the code?" asked the locksmith. Marina just shook her head. The man began working on the internal gears, listening carefully to the almost imperceptible sounds that indicated the correct combination. Each click was like a step closer to something she wasn't sure she wanted to discover. Time seemed to drag on. The smell of dust and metal filled the air. Marina felt her breathing heavy, cold sweat on her palms. A part of her wanted the safe to remain closed, but another, stronger part needed to know. Until finally a different sound echoed the final click. The locksmith took a step back. "There you go. It's all yours." Marina hesitated for a moment. The safe seemed to breathe. She grabbed the doorknob and pulled slowly. The low creak of metal mixed with the sound of his racing heart. And then, you see, for a moment I didn't know if I was dreaming. There before her were objects and papers that made no sense. old photographs, sealed envelopes, and something that looked like a leather-bound diary, intact despite the years. Everything inside the vault seemed charged with a silent, almost suffocating energy, as if those things were waiting for just that moment to be revealed. Marina felt a chill run down her spine. She knew instinctively that none of this was just old hat stuff. And more than that, I felt that by opening that safe, I had crossed an invisible border. What he would find in the pages of that diary would change everything, but that she didn't know yet. There were letters, handwritten letters, with the delicate, slightly slanted handwriting that Marina had known since childhood. The yellowed paper betrayed its age, and some of the pages were stained, perhaps from dried tears, perhaps from the dampness of the basement. They all had the same recipient, to my daughter Marina, but none had been sent. They were words that remained trapped in silence, kept like a treasure or like a curse. With trembling hands, Marina picked up the first letter and began to read. The sentences were loaded with an almost painful sincerity. Mother spoke of sleepless nights, trying to find the strength to smile in the morning. He reported bouts of physical pain and a fatigue that wouldn't go away, clues to a silent battle with an illness he never mentioned. But what was most cutting were the subtext, a deep loneliness disguised by calm and careful phrases, as if she didn't want her daughter to feel the weight she carried. Marina turned a few more pages. It was then that she found something that made her stop. Among the letters was a larger sealed envelope with a simple title, "About your father." The heart raced. She hesitated, staring at the seal as one might stare at a door that might be best kept closed. But curiosity and the need to understand spoke louder. When he opened it, he found not only words, but also old photographs. In them, his father smiled. But he was not alone. There was a woman whom Marina had never seen before, and 2 children. Family. Another family. The shock made her drop the photos for a moment, accompanied them. He read the letter. There, the mother revealed that she had discovered everything years before, and that, despite the pain, she had decided not to tell to protect Marina. "I would rather you remember your father as a present and loving man, and not as someone who broke our family." Every word felt like a blow. Marina felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. Childhood memories began to become distorted. Small moments that had previously seemed ordinary, unexplained absences, interrupted phone calls, glances exchanged between parents now made sense. A cruel sense. The tears came without her being able to stop them. It wasn't just her father's betrayal, but the realization that her mother had carried that weight alone, and yet she had tried to protect her, even if it meant walking away. The distance that Marina had always interpreted as coldness was actually a shield, a wall built to prevent his daughter from being hit by the shrapnel of an unbearable truth. She sat there on the cold basement floor, surrounded by letters and photos, as if she were at the center of a puzzle that had just been put together before her eyes. It all made sense now, but what to do with it? Keep? Confront? Forget? The safe, once a simple hidden object, now looked like a portal. And Marina knew that once she walked through that door, there was no turning back. The truth had been revealed, but perhaps there was more, because at the bottom of the box there was still a heavy leather-bound diary closed with a small padlock, and the way it was placed, separated from the rest, It seemed to contain something even deeper, something that perhaps her mother would never have had the courage to write in her letters. Marina took a deep breath, wiped away her tears, and looked at the diary. The feeling was clear. If she opened that lock, she was about to learn a side of the story that could change not only what she thought about the past, but who she was. Marina canceled the sale. It was an almost instinctive decision made with the heart before the mind even had time to calculate the consequences. The contract papers remained on the table in the living room, motionless, like silent witnesses to a destiny that would not come to fruition. She knew that in the practical world it didn't make sense. There were still debts, there were still bills to pay. But suddenly, the urgency to solve everything with numbers became small compared to the emotional weight that house carried. In the days that followed, Marina began to visit each room with a different perspective. The narrow hallway no longer felt suffocating. Now it was like a memory tunnel where she could almost hear her small, childlike footsteps running toward the kitchen. The room where she had slept during her adolescence, once cold and forgotten, now seemed to envelop her in a silent embrace. And the basement? Oh, the basement. Once a dark and feared place, it became the most sacred part of the house. It was there that the letters were kept. It was there that the mother's voice through the written words still echoed. Marina found herself reading and rereading the letters night after night. Sometimes I cried, sometimes he smiled, and often he would simply close his eyes and try to imagine his mother sitting there, writing, perhaps in the dim light of a lamp, spilling out thoughts she never had the courage to say aloud. She finally understood that some secrets aren't about hiding, but about protecting. Protect from pain that perhaps the person was not ready to face. Protect from truths that, if revealed at the wrong time, could destroy more than heal. And painfully, Marina realized that this protection had come at a high price. It had cost the closeness between mother and daughter. But it had also been an act of love, a silent love, a love that renounces itself so that the other does not suffer. The irony is that she only understood this when she could no longer look her mother in the eye and say, "I understand, and I thank you." That was the hardest weight to carry, that of a thank you that would never be heard by the person who deserved it. As the weeks went by, Marina began to take care of the house like never before. He painted the walls, opened windows to let the sun in, planted flowers in the garden that had been neglected for years. Every detail was a way of reconnecting with memories, of transforming pain into tribute. And little by little, the place that was once a symbol of rupture became a refuge. At night, she would go down to the basement, sit on the cold floor, lean her back against the wall, and open a letter at random. It was as if he was talking to his mother, as if through those pages time went back and they could finally meet at the same point. One day, while rereading one of the last letters, Marina came across a sentence she had never really noticed before. "Love, my daughter, is strongest when it is silent, because silence carries everything that words cannot say." Those words became a mantra, and it was then that she realized that, in a way, her mother had never really left. It was there, between the walls and the wood of the stairs and the smell of coffee that sometimes seemed to come out of nowhere, and, above all, in the letters kept so carefully. Marina began writing her own letters, not for anyone specific, but as a way of recording your own story. your own secrets, your own truths. He kept them in the same safe, now without a padlock, as if he wanted to say to the future, if anyone ever comes here, let them know they are not alone. The house stopped being a burden and became a legacy of feelings, a place where pain and love coexisted, where every memory, no matter how bitter, was intertwined with gestures of care. Some secrets are only revealed when time decides we are ready. And when that happens, no matter how much it hurts, they have the power to change everything. Marina's life changed, and perhaps yours will change too, if one day you decide to open your own vault, that place inside you where the stories you most fear facing are kept. Because in the end, we all have one. The question is, would you have the courage to open it? Application to generate comments. Now I want to know from you, if I were in Marina's shoes, would I open the safe and face what was inside? Or would I prefer never to know? Leave your answer in the comments. I really want to read your opinion. If this story touched your heart and made you reflect, like the video so more people can learn about it. And if you like exciting stories like this, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss the next ones. Here, each story is a window into what we feel, what we experience, and sometimes what we still need to understand.